Do you ever see things that aren't supposed to be there? I know the question is too vague, so I'll try to explain this more specifically. First off, I'm talking about beings, creatures, or aliens, whatever you want to call them. I see things that seem alive. I call the creatures Smurfs because that's kind of how they look like. They are round with no sharp edges, and they really do seem like have been drawn into the real world. I think the first time I understood that I was seeing things that others couldn't see was when I was 5 years old. I don't remember it, but my parents tell me that I used to tell them of imaginary friends all the time until I grew out of it. At least that's what they think I did. I was playing in the backyard one day and saw one of the Smurfs just strolling around alone. I told my dad about it, giggling like little children would, but Dad couldn't see it. That experience was what made me understand I was the only one who could see the creatures. As the experience of being told that my imagination ran wild got tiresome, even as a young girl, I learned to be more careful of what I say to others. The thing about these creatures is that they don't interact with our world. They don't mess with us, nor do they touch anything in our world. I don't even think they are aware of us. Aside from me being able to see them, there's basically no connection between us and them. So logically speaking, one has to wonder, is she crazy? Meaning, am I crazy? I like to say no, but I would also say that it's a fair question, and therefore I'll try to answer it. What makes me crazy? Seeing the creatures, right? But that's really about it. I'm a perfectly functioning human being. I went to college with full scholarship. I have a doctorate degree in organic chemistry. I earn a six-figure salary working for one of the top corporations in the country. I get along just fine with my family, and I've got friends whom I hang out with on a regular basis. I'm really not much different from the average Jane. I'm 34 years old as I write this email to you, and even as I type along, I still see the creatures moving about my home. I've got friends working in many different fields, and I've tried looking into these things for many years, but no one really seems to have an answer for them. Of course, I've never admitted that it was my own experience. After all, things like this, you don't want them attached in your resume. The main reason why I decided to send you this story was because of something that happened to me just a few days ago. I was doing dishes in the kitchen and saw one of the Smurfs walk around in my backyard. I could see it clearly because there's a large window right above my kitchen sink, giving me a clear view of the backyard. At first, it went about its business like they all do and have for years. I kept staring at it as I was doing the dishes. Then I began to feel that it perceived my gaze. It would stop walking for a second, then kind of sheepishly turn its head in my direction. It almost seemed like it didn't want to be caught looking. The more it did that though, the closer I looked at it. Let's face it, it was the first time the Smurfs seemed to acknowledge my presence. It was exciting and also kind of scary at the same time. At one point, I stopped doing the dishes and stepped outside into the yard. I wanted to get a stronger reaction out of the creature. I really wanted a confirmation that it was seeing me as well. I walked closer and closer when all of a sudden it snapped its head up and looked straight into my eyes. I stopped in my tracks and had no clue what to do next. I'll be honest, a few more seconds and I would have shit my pants, but it ran off before I was smeared in poo. I haven't seen it since, but I have a feeling I will see it again one day. I mean, I see the others all the time, but I'm talking about that particular creature that could see me. By the way, I call it Scary Smurf because of the way it ran off. I think the temptation to satisfy its curiosity will be far greater than its fear. I know this because it is essentially the same as me. The others couldn't see me, but Scary Smurf could. I could see the others, but no other human beings can see them. That's why I think it'll come back one day, and when it does, I'd like to find out once and for all if they are actually real. For a little background information, my great-grandfather is 100% Navajo. My father, on the other hand, is 25% Navajo and 25% Cherokee. He was born and raised in Texas, so naturally had knowledge of the Wendigo and the Naagloshii, or better known to the general public as the skinwalker. He moved to California, met my mom there, and eventually they got married. Dad wanted to move back to Texas once my brother and I were born, but unfortunately for him, Mom didn't share the sentiment. When I was 14, Dad and I visited a reservation in New Mexico. We were there for deer and pheasant hunting, so I brought my .30-30 Winchester lever-action rifle and Dad his pump-action 12-gauge shotgun to do our deeds. Deer and pheasant hunting seasons being in the summer, we had plenty of daylight hours for the hunt. Before we started the day, Dad warned me to not say the names of our supernatural beings. I responded while smirking, "In order not to upset the skinwalkers?" He said yes and reiterated to not offend them and, more importantly, to be respectful of the elders. There was an elder named Washo who was nearby and overheard me saying skinwalker. He walked over to us and warned us not to go. He advised us to go see the shaman for blessings, citing that I've upset the great spirits. My father, though, was well versed in our tradition. Holding a small bag of ash, he responded, "Thank you, Washo, but I've got this." Washo understood, so he said a prayer for us, and we went on our way. A coyote passed us about an hour into our travel. It was a sign of bad luck. My dad said a Navajo prayer to appease the spirits, but a few minutes later, 2 owls flew over us. It signified a close loved one would get in harm's way. Half an hour after witnessing the 2 bad omen, I saw a big black dog. It didn't occur to me to tell Dad because wild dogs are very common in the area. We arrived at an ancient campground 3 hours later and decided to set up camp there for the night. It wasn't until we were finished setting up the camp that I told my father about the big black dog. He took some ashes from the campfire and scattered them around our campsite. We weren't overly concerned and were only taking precautionary measure. I was awoken to my father's voice in the middle of the night. I was always a light sleeper, and therefore it didn't take much noise to wake me up from my slumber. I looked over at Dad to see what he was up to, and that's when I realized his voice sounded rather strange. If I have to describe, he sounded just like my handicapped cousin when he tries to imitate my dad's speech. That's when I heard my father snoring and nearly shit myself. I could feel it in my gut that the skinwalker had come for retribution. I had angered it earlier in the day when I said its name, and it had come to take my form. I looked around the tent but saw nothing. So then I looked behind me and a clear silhouette of a tall man could be seen. He was skinny, had a sharp head, and his arms were unnaturally long like that of the apes. He was hunched over, and if I have to guess, I'd say he was about 10 yards away from our tent. Although I was in a panic, I instinctively cocked my rifle, then put my hand over my father's mouth to prevent him from speaking out loud. He was awoken, so I quickly put my finger over my lips, then gestured for him to listen. After he heard the skinwalker speak, Dad began reciting Cherokee and Navajo prayers consecutively. I've never been taught how to say those prayers, and therefore all I could do was to repeat the words he spoke. It felt like hours had passed when the skinwalker left our camp, lightly jogging but on all fours. As it ran off, it continued to mimic my voice as it repeated, "It's okay, Washo." Then morning came and the sun broke through the foliage. Dad and I carefully checked our surroundings, but we stopped short of tracking the thing. We packed our stuff and left the ancient campground. Upon arriving at the reservation, we spoke to Elder Wosho about the ordeal from the previous night, to which he urged us to go see the shaman. We took the advice, received a cleansing ritual, then left the next day. The experience hasn't deterred me from camping, but needless to say, I'm always with company when I spend the night out in the woods. More importantly though, I always make sure to be armed and ready for anything out there. I know why people get mad. In fact, I know why people get hurt, distracted, stressed, and why they feel all other ailments that affect them from birth to death. I see the different clouds, or should I call them fogs. Regardless, they look like gaseous things that fly around and enter our heads at will. I don't know what those things are and what prompts them to manipulate our disposition, but that's what they do, and they do exist. I've always wondered if they were perhaps part of who we are as human beings, but the more I see them, the more I think they are an entirely different species from us. I would think by now you are thinking, this guy's either full of shit or has gone completely insane. I wouldn't blame you if you thought of me worse, because in all of my life on this planet, I haven't seen anyone else who can see what I see. Let's go back to the beginning of how all of this started to help you understand me better. I was involved in a severe motor vehicle collision some years ago. I was in the passenger seat in a sedan and wasn't wearing the seatbelt. The car was estimated to have been traveling at 90 miles per hour, and upon impact with the other vehicle, I was ejected from the car head first right through the front windshield. The fact that I was still breathing when the ambulance arrived was a miracle on its own, but surviving the 12-hour surgery was an even greater miracle, or so the doctors told me. I was in a coma for 22 days after the surgery, but was bestowed another miracle when I woke up with perfect mental condition against all expectations of the medical experts. I couldn't see well when I first woke up. The blurred vision continued for almost a week, but looking back, I was already seeing the smoke-like beings near other people from the moment I woke up. I just didn't know what I was seeing, or rather if I was seeing those things because of the temporary visual impairment. When my vision came back, it didn't come back completely or the same as before. I didn't need glasses prior to the accident, but now I did if I wanted to see things clearly. I was also sensitive to bright lights, and so my glasses were specially made for clarity and also to help with photophobia, which is just another word for light sensitivity. I saw specialists for my eye condition, and I don't mean for photophobia, but strictly for the smoke or clouds I was seeing in the air near people. I got standard answers from the doctors, you know, the usual shit they tell you. It'll get better with time, let's see if the medications clear things up, that sort of thing. Obviously, things didn't clear up with time. But then I began to notice a pattern between the movement of the cloud things and the emotional changes of people. Let's say, for example, my mom was in a perfectly good mood. But when one of the clouds, and I say one of the, because I see a number of them hovering in the air at any given time. But to continue, whenever one of the clouds sort of dissipates into a human being, and in this example, my mom, her emotional state changes from neutral to negative or from positive to neutral. You can even see the changes in her face. It took me a little while to recognize the little nuances, but eventually the changes were clear as day. I believe there's something to the shapes of the clouds. The color is always the same, not much different from the clouds of rainy days. They are gray in different gradient. The shapes, though, they vary from the rounder ones to the much sharper ones. It's almost like the clouds have edges like blades. So far from what I've observed, the sharper they are, the harder the effect they have on people. The rounder clouds merely make people testy or depressed, whereas the sharper ones tend to make them violent or impulsive. The clouds are always hanging around us, just hovering in the air until it finds its target. I don't know what it is or how it chooses the people to alter. So far, I haven't found a pattern to that. What I could tell you though is that the nicer the person, the less the clouds they attract. People who are universally disliked are like magnets to the clouds. So much so that sometimes I could barely see their faces. So it begs the question, what came first, chicken or the egg? Do good, normal people become bad people when the clouds alter their emotional state? Or is that the naturally bad people tend to attract more of the clouds? Sadly, I don't have answers to those questions either. I would also like to point out that I can't see those clouds on TV. Whether the medium would be a pre-recorded media, like say a Blu-ray or YouTube, I can't see the clouds. The same goes for live broadcast TV events. I could, however, see the clouds through the glasses I wear, and so I assume it may have something to do with digital image. I can't be sure because I don't have much knowledge in electronics or technology in general. And that's about it. I've only got questions and no answers. This is something that I live with on a daily basis, and all I could do is to try to learn from the things I see. Lastly, I should probably mention that I don't really know how the clouds affect me specifically because they enter your head from behind, and I never caught one in action. They don't appear in mirror either, so I'm afraid it's something that I'll never see entering my head. What are they? Why do they exist? Why do they do what they do? Your guess is as good as mine. All I can do is to tell you what I see because the cloud beings, they do exist. I wish I had more to tell you, but this is all I've got. Thank you for your time. Goodbye, Dennis. I was born and raised, spent my 20s and 30s in the same town where I live till this day. We are a small community here, consisting of a few patches of suburban areas, 2 shopping malls, one medium-sized and the other tiny, 1 block of shopping strip, and that's about all we've got here. The great thing about living in the same town for over 40 years is the familiarity and trust you build over the years. The bad, I personally don't have much, but I suppose for some people, things can get very boring. But anywho, there's a spot in our town where tons of accidents and generally unpleasant things happen on a year-to-year basis. I understand that every town has those places, but ours is a little different in that it consists of only the middle portion of a single city block near the shopping strip where I spoke of earlier. The distance of the portion of the block would be about 15 yards max, so we're talking about a very tiny zone within the town. A dozen or so car accidents happen in the zone every year. When bad fights break out, it almost always happens within the zone. The occurrences might not be too weird for someone new to our town or even for someone who's lived there for a few years, but I've seen the same things repeat year after year for 40 years now. It isn't normal for all those bad things to happen concentrated in that small area of the town. It wouldn't be normal for the trend to continue for 2 years, let alone for over 40 years. Now, mind you, my folks have told me it's been that way even as far as the day they first moved to this town. That's almost 50 years ago, so who knows how long it's been going on. The worst thing that happened in that zone took place 2 years ago, I believe in June. A young married couple got into an argument. The husband was carrying a concealed weapon, and he ended up peppering the wife with 6 rounds to her legs, arms, and torso. The wife miraculously survived the shooting, but that wasn't the most surprising thing about the incident. You see, the young husband had a clean record. He was highly educated, had a well-paying job, neighbors had only good things to say about him, and this one is a doozy. The most important bit of information on him: his wife actually spoke on his behalf in court. I wasn't in court during the proceedings, but word spread fast in small towns, and pretty much everyone knew what was said in the courtroom the day after the first hearing. The wife says something along the line that she wasn't herself in the moment of the shooting, and that she was certain her husband was also in an abnormal state when he shot her multiple times. She basically pled insanity for her husband, and it worked out too because the husband didn't get any jail time. I believe he was sent to some mental institution for 6 months, and he got out after that. Although I hear he had mandatory appointments at a psychiatric center every few days or something. Now tell me this, no matter how much you love someone, could anyone in the right mind let someone off the hook after they try to kill you? I understand a parent would do that in a heartbeat, but a wife? That's insane, right? A perfectly normal couple go out for shopping, they pass through the miserable zone, and the husband ends up spraying the wife with 6 bullets. No apparent past troubles, no records of mental issues, but bang, 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 the wife gets the lead. It happened in that very zone, that godforsaken zone of perpetual misery. Is it a coincidence, or is there something more to that zone? None of my family members walk or drive past that zone. The residents who live there for a long period tend to do the same. People don't talk about it much because, let's face it, no one likes to be seen as a whack job. I don't know what it is with that zone, and I'll probably never find out, but I thought I'd share the story since I can't imagine how talking about it could possibly bring harms my way. I won't tell you where this place is for obvious reasons, but don't worry too much. The chances of you ever stopping by my tiny town is slim to none. When I was young, my parents used to take me to summer camps every year until the age of 12. One year, I was sent to a really fancy summer camp that had plenty of outdoor activities prepared for the kids. We had 2 huge pools, a golf course, a soccer field, and half a dozen tennis courts at the camp. I'm an only child, and therefore I never got to go to those camps with a sibling, which helps because the first day it's all about making new friends. Kids with brothers or sisters always got along with other kids much faster, and I was always envious of that. It took me an hour or 2 of playing alone at the pool, but eventually I found a really nice girl named Sally, and she had become my best friend at the camp. The camp counselors take pictures every half hour or so of random moments and children. Those photos go in the selection pool for the parents to buy additional photos aside from the group shots we take every morning and evening. Out of all the camps I attended as a child, I remember that camp as the most entertaining out of the bunch, and a lot of that had to do with Sally. We had become very close during the 3 weeks we spent together, and we continued that friendship even after the camp had ended. Sally lived 40 minutes drive from my place, but we had become so inseparable that our parents drove us to each other's homes for sleepovers every other week. We saw each other less and less with time. It wasn't us who strayed apart, but rather our parents did less and less driving for us as the months progressed. By the time I enrolled in high school, we weren't talking anymore. I had no idea what she was up to, and I'm sure it was the same for her. I graduated high school and probably thought of Sally a few times during this stretch of time. By college though, I stopped thinking about her completely and had made a new best friend. Her name's Elizabeth, but all her friends call her Liz. On my second year in college, and this was right at the start of summer vacation, Liz stayed at my folks for a few days before she went home to her parents. On her final day of stay after lunch, Mom brought out some old photo albums to do what moms do, show off some embarrassing photos of their kids and have a good laugh. We were checking out the album containing a bunch of photos from my summer camps when Liz abruptly placed her hand in the middle of the album to stop my mom from flipping to the next page. She then said, "That's Sally. That's my cousin Sally." I was surprised and also a little happy for some reason. I chuckled and said, "So my summer camp best friend is the cousin of my college best friend? Holy sheez, that's too much of a coincidence. That's crazy." Strangely, Liz squeezed out a fake smile as if she wasn't amused, but at the same time, it was clear that she didn't want to embarrass me. She responded, "Sally, unfortunately, is no longer with us. She died in a car accident when she was only 16. The tears slowly dampened my face before I even realized I was crying. I haven't seen Sally in nearly a decade. It didn't feel normal that her death would have this much impact on me, but it did. Liz and Mom consoled me for nearly an hour until I was calm again. This was the first time I had lost anyone close to me, and maybe that's why it hit me so hard." The day ended palpably in a somber mood. I drove Liz to the airport the next day, and we checked our luggage once we arrived. We got to the airport way too early, so we decided to have a coffee as we wait for our flight. I was feeling alright, but I couldn't shake the thought that Liz was holding in something. I said to her, "Tell me, Liz, what's going on with you? You know you could tell me anything, right?" I had never seen her so serious before as she responded, "It's probably nothing, and I shouldn't even bring this up, but I'll tell you. The photo your mom showed us, the one you took with Liz, in it there are 3 other kids who are posing next to you. The 2 boys are Ethan and Grayson, and the girl is Riley. All 3 of them were our neighbors. My family and I lived a block down from Sally's place, and the 3 other kids had all lived within a 3-block radius. We all went to the same high school, although neither Sally or I were particularly close to any of them. As I said, Sally died in a car accident when she was 16. The following year, Ethan died from drug overdose. Then following his death shortly thereafter, Grayson had drowned in a boating accident. Finally, last year, I heard news that Riley was found dead in an alleyway with multiple stabbing wounds. It wasn't a mugging gone wrong since none of her belongings were taken from her. Someone just killed her in cold blood, and the police could never find the perpetrator. So what it boils down to is that everyone in that photo had died." When Liz was done talking, I was so scared and shocked that I couldn't say or do anything. Liz tried to convince me that it was probably nothing and that I was making too big of a deal out of nothing. But she wasn't doing a great job though, since she couldn't lift the concerns off her face either. It's been 2 years since that day, but I still live with the constant fear of getting offed one day. One could argue that it's a coincidence, but let me ask you this. If you took a photo with 4 other people, and 3 of them being complete strangers, when everyone in the photo died or were killed in separate incidents, and you were the only one alive, could you honestly feel that it's all a coincidence? I suck at math, but you don't have to be a genius to figure out that the odds of that happening is probably much lesser than the chance of winning the lottery. Maybe it's nothing, maybe it's something, or maybe it's everything. I really don't know. I wish I didn't have to feel like I'm living on borrowed time, but that's exactly how I feel every day. I hate to say this, but Liz should have never told me about the other kids. That is the end of this video, ladies and gentlemen. Let us give a big thank you to Katerina, David, Ricardo, Stacy, and Joan for the stories. I couldn't interview any of the authors this time, but I did rewrite all of their stories, so hopefully they're all pleased with the final draft. Interview has been hard to come by in recent days because something's been keeping me very busy at nights. But I do have a couple of older stories for which I have interviewed the authors already weeks ago, and currently I'm in the process of rewriting those stories. So you can expect one of those longer stories in the next couple of weeks, I think. Let's do another story time before I let you go. So this is something that happened to me when I was a kid, and it's related to the topic that I spoke on this video, strange phenomena. You know what? I actually have a couple of stories. One is something that happened to me while I was living in Japan. すっげえ怖い。本当にやばいですね。And the other is from the time that I lived in Paraguay, or Paraguay. Una historia de miedo que le va a dar un buen susto. Es bien chingón, le va a gustar. I'm sorry about that. The thing is, I actually noticed that I have a few viewers from Japan, which was really surprising. And quite a few folks in South America watching as well. I'm not talking about bilingual folks who live in the US, but rather people who are actually living in those regions. So anywho, seeing as how I lived in those countries and region and also speak the languages, I thought I'd communicate with them in their native language for just a few seconds. But going back to the story, I'm just gonna tell the one that happened in Paraguay. I was 12 or 13 when this happened, so it was about a year before moving back home in Queens, New York. My best friend at the time, Ruben, well, he and I were seated on the wall in front of his house. The walls in Paraguay are kind of different from the ones you picture here in the stateside. A big percentage of homes there are built on elevated lands, about a meter higher than the sidewalk for the most part. So the walls are only as tall as the land that the houses are built on. Therefore, you can lay back and look up in the sky as you please. So Ruben and I were talking about our favorite cartoons and also about girls. I think specifically I was talking about the blonde 5 houses down from my place. Her mom operated a small grocery store in our house, so basically the front of the house is a store and the rest is a regular house. She was really cute. I one time took her to an ice cream parlor called Guarani. ¿Qué mejor que tomar un helado Guarani? Sí. But why am I talking about this? I'm sorry. I've completely gone off course. But yeah, Ruben, after talking about random stuff for like half an hour, we both lay down to rest our backs and also to look up in the clear night sky. There's hardly any pollution in Paraguay, so the sky is crystal clear night and day. It's especially beautiful at night. What great times, you know? I mean, imagine a place and time where children can play outside without having to worry about perverts and getting abducted. We had video games back then, we had computers, arcades, and of course TV, but we weren't interested at all in those things. We played soccer all day after school, rode our BMX bike for like miles at a time, and we did everything outdoors. Children were fit, strong as horse, and they actually behaved as normal human beings. What do you got nowadays though? Online gaming, porn, watch idiots flip bottles, 1,000-degree knives. Oh my god, what a sad world it has become. Our children have little to no social skills. All they know how to say is kill yourself, and they don't even spell it out. KYS, KYS. It's one thing to be an adult and gain the extra pounds, but we got children that look like Oprah after eating a hippo. That is not cool. That is not cool. I was gonna say Oprah after eating a hippo. I'm sorry. I should have said that. I was trying to make a point that went overboard. I apologize to fans of opera. Shit. Where am I going with this? I think I ruined the story already, but I'll finish it since that would be polite. So yeah, Ruben and I were looking up in the sky, so I saw a light for a second and it disappeared. A few seconds later, it appeared again, but this time it began moving slowly to my right. By the way, we're talking about a light that's way up in the sky. From my perspective, it was like a red dot in a huge canvas that is the night sky. I pointed at the sky and told Ruben to look at the light. He saw it too, and we were both thinking that it's probably a chopper. But then the thought of chopper went out the window when the light sped from one end of the sky to the other so fast that it was hardly a second. We might have been kids, but we both knew that speed just wasn't possible to achieve in a helicopter. The Harrier jump jet could hover in the sky, but I don't think it can hover at that altitude where the air is a lot thinner. And it definitely couldn't jet from hovering position to a distance that was probably at least a mile away in less than a second. But after that, it did some insane maneuvers and it disappeared way up in the sky. And that was the first time I had seen a UFO. Now remember, a UFO is an unidentified flying object, so I ain't saying that it was an alien craft or the devil dancing to dubstep. All I'm saying is, I saw a UFO, a craft that could pull off incredible maneuvers at brain-bursting speeds. The feeling that you get upon seeing something that spectacular is impossible to explain in words. Don't tell anyone and keep this between us. I've got a reputation to uphold at my restaurant and I really need the job if I'm gonna retire by the age of 50. I'm gonna trust you people. Thank you for listening and for keeping the secret. Have a pleasant evening. I'll talk to you guys on the next one. Goodbye.